Her yoga sessions hid a shocking secret, uncovering an indecent truth. "You won't believe this." John sat in the living room, thoughtfully rubbing his temple. His hands were tired after a long day at the auto repair shop, but thoughts about his wife kept him restless. Amanda was closing the bedroom door, hurriedly changing into her outfit for her morning yoga session. She was a woman impossible to overlook. Amanda had wavy, light blonde hair that cascaded onto her shoulders and emerald green eyes that always seemed a bit mysterious. Her figure was athletic and slender yet feminine, drawing attention wherever she went. She always knew how to choose outfits that looked both elegant and subtly alluring. Now, she stood in front of the mirror in her black sports top and leggings, checking to make sure everything fit perfectly. John loved her more than anything. Every morning, waking up next to her, he felt like the luckiest man in the world. To him, Amanda was not just a beauty but also his closest friend, the person who always knew how to support him. "John, have you seen my water bottle? I left it somewhere yesterday." Amanda's voice broke his train of thought. "In the kitchen, near the coffee maker," he replied, his eyes fixed on the TV, though he was actually watching her every move. Amanda quickly grabbed the bottle and smiled at him, a warm, fleeting smile as if her thoughts were already elsewhere. "Yoga is so important to me. You can't even imagine. I feel like it restores my energy and balance. I hope you don't mind me spending so much time on it," she asked, fastening her bright pink sneakers. "Of course not," John replied. "If it makes you happy, I'm all for it." It was true. John was ready to support her in everything. He wasn't the controlling or jealous type. On the contrary, he always trusted her. Their relationship was built on mutual respect and love, the strongest foundation he could imagine. Amanda walked over and touched his shoulder. "I know how hard you work, John. You always think more about me than yourself. Promise me you'll also find time for yourself. Maybe you could even join me for yoga?" John laughed. "Me? Yoga? No thanks. I'll stick with my gym and weights. But thanks for the invite." She laughed in response, and her laugh was so enchanting that he often wondered how he'd gotten so lucky. But in recent weeks, something had changed. Amanda had become more reserved, spending more time on her phone, and her smile, once genuine and warm, started to feel a bit distant. He tried to push these thoughts away, convincing himself it was just his imagination. "I'm off. Don't want to be late," Amanda said, grabbing her yoga bag and hastily shutting the door behind her. John watched as she left the house, his heart sinking slightly. He couldn't explain the feeling, but something about her behavior felt unusual. Too perfect, too deliberate. "Maybe it's just my exhaustion," he muttered under his breath, switching the TV channel. But that thought, that little signal in his mind, refused to let him rest. Amanda left the house, throwing a parting glance at John, and headed to her car. Today was another yoga session she had been looking forward to. It seemed to be more than just physical exercise for her. It was a ritual, a part of her life that brought her joy and inner peace. As she arrived at the yoga studio, Amanda parked her car. The studio was nestled in a cozy neighborhood, housed in a small building with large windows that let in warm light. A sign reading "Harmony of Body and Mind" underscored the seriousness of the place. Amanda adjusted her ponytail and confidently stepped inside. Entering the changing room, she took off her sneakers, replaced them with light ballet slippers, and stored her belongings in a locker. She pulled out her favorite yoga mat, which she always carried with her, and headed to the hall. The hall was spacious, with mirrors along one wall and soft wooden flooring. Shelves held aromatic candles, and the air carried a faint lavender scent, promoting relaxation. Amanda was among the first to arrive, as always. She loved setting up early to get into the right mindset for the session. "Amanda, great to see you," greeted Lauren, the yoga instructor. She was a middle-aged woman with a relaxed smile and a calm voice. "How have you been?" "Wonderful, Lauren. I feel like these sessions are truly changing me. I've become more focused, calm, even happy." "That's great to hear," Lauren nodded. "But remember, yoga isn't just about physical exercises. It's also about inner harmony. It's important to listen to yourself." Amanda smiled and took her place in the front row. She carefully unrolled her mat, prepared her water bottle and towel, and then sat cross-legged, waiting for the session to start. Once everyone had gathered, Lauren turned on quiet instrumental music, reminiscent of nature sounds. She stepped to the center of the hall and began the session with meditation. Amanda closed her eyes and focused on her breathing, just as she had been taught. A deep inhale, a slow exhale. She imagined all the negative emotions leaving her body, leaving only pure energy inside. After a few minutes, Lauren moved on to warm-ups, and then they began more advanced poses. Amanda moved gracefully, confidently mimicking every movement of the instructor. Her face was focused yet serene. Lauren approached each participant, adjusting their poses, and when she reached Amanda, she praised her. "You're doing wonderfully today. Your movements have become more flexible." "Thank you, Lauren. I'm really trying," Amanda replied, not breaking her pose. Throughout the session, Amanda was exceptionally focused. She transitioned from one pose to the next, putting in maximum effort. While others occasionally paused to rest, Amanda kept going, maintaining her pace without faltering. During the final part of the session, when everyone performed the Savasana, resting pose, Amanda lay on her mat, staring at the ceiling. Her breathing was steady, but her mind was racing. Did yoga truly bring her peace, or was it merely an escape from something? As the session ended, Lauren wished everyone a good day. Amanda approached her to thank her for the lesson. "That was incredible. You always know how to set the right tone." "You're doing great, Amanda. Yoga is a journey, and you're already on the right path. But remember, the most important thing is to be honest with yourself." Lauren's words struck Amanda, though she didn't show it. She returned to the changing room, grabbed her belongings, and left the building. It was already dark outside. Amanda got into her car and stared thoughtfully at the city lights. Her phone rang, and she quickly answered. "Yes, I'm done. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Ending the call, she started the engine and drove off the parking lot, once again losing the lightness she had felt at the beginning of the session. Yoga was her passion, her escape, but today, she sensed something unusual. It was as if someone, or something, was waiting for her beyond the studio walls, and it had nothing to do with harmony. Back at home, John sat at the kitchen table, absent-mindedly twirling in his chair, his gaze fixed on the door. He knew Amanda had just left for another yoga session, but her growing obsession with this hobby was starting to trouble him. Too many things didn't align with his understanding of their sincere relationship. The changes had started a few months ago. Yoga became more than just a hobby for Amanda. She began buying more expensive outfits for her sessions, tops, leggings, and sports bras that looked like they came from a fashion show rather than a sports store. She spent hours selecting the perfect ensemble, as if it held some critical significance. "Amanda," John had once asked when she brought home another bag from a boutique, "do you really need all these things for yoga?" "Of course," she replied, not lifting her eyes from her phone. "It's not just exercise, it's an art. And I want to look the part." John nodded, but his unease didn't fade. He had always supported her interests, but this shift in her behavior felt too sudden. One day, while Amanda was in the bathroom, John noticed her phone light up silently on the kitchen counter. He wasn't one to invade her privacy, but he glanced at the screen anyway. A message from someone labeled L. Reed, "Can't wait to see you. Everything is ready. Tonight will be unforgettable." John froze, wondering who this mysterious L could be. His hands trembled, and he quickly set the phone down when he heard the bathroom door open. "Who messaged?" Amanda asked, noticing his glance at her phone. "Oh, I think it was a reminder from the yoga studio," John lied, trying to appear calm. Amanda gave a brief nod and quickly slipped her phone into her bag. Later that week, John tried to bring up the idea of attending one of her yoga sessions. "Amanda, maybe I could visit your studio and see how you practice? It could be interesting." "No, John." Her reply was unexpectedly firm. "This is personal. Yoga is my place to be alone, without any pressure." "You know I'm not pressuring you," he tried to reassure her. "I just want to understand what it means to you." "John, I'm serious," she said sharply, avoiding his gaze. "It's just for me." Her response only deepened his suspicions. Amanda had always invited him to join everything she did. They went for walks together, biked, and even signed up for cooking classes. But now yoga was a no-go zone, a sacred space where John wasn't allowed. One evening, after Amanda returned home from yoga, John decided to check her bag. He wasn't proud of his actions, but he felt it was his only chance to get answers. In her gym bag, he found a bottle of expensive perfume she never wore at home and a small satin envelope with a mysterious symbol on it. "What's this?" he asked the next morning, holding up the envelope. Amanda froze mid-step, caught off guard, but quickly composed herself. "It's just promotional material from the studio," she said, snatching the envelope from his hands. "I was going to tell you about it." "Then why did you hide it?" "John, don't start," she snapped, evading his question once more. His anxiety grew. He started waking up in the middle of the night, staring at the empty side of the bed when Amanda stayed out late after her sessions. He didn't know if it was just jealousy, or if there was truly something more. One day, while Amanda was at another yoga session, John decided to act. He downloaded a phone tracker app and entered her number, hoping to locate the studio she was so secretive about. The result made his heart sink. Her location wasn't anywhere near the yoga studio. It was at an old motel on the outskirts of town. John couldn't believe his eyes. He started piecing everything together. The expensive outfits, the secretive messages, her firm refusal to let him into her new world. His heart ached with pain and suspicion, but he decided to remain calm and gather more information. When Amanda came home that night, John tried to act as usual. "How was your session?" he asked, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "Wonderful," she replied, taking off her jacket. "I feel more relaxed than ever." John nodded silently, but inside, a storm was brewing. He knew he was facing a tough decision. Confront Amanda with what he had discovered or keep digging to uncover her secrets entirely. The next morning, John couldn't shake his feeling of unease. All the little details he had noticed over time were coming together into a picture that looked increasingly unpleasant. He decided he couldn't stay silent anymore. The time had come. After breakfast, as Amanda was getting ready for another session, John approached her. She stood in front of the mirror, towel drying her hair, and didn't notice him coming closer. "Amanda," his voice was calm but firm, "I need you to explain why your yoga sessions have become so secretive. Why don't you want me there anymore? Why are you hiding things from me more and more?" Amanda turned to face him, her expression stressed but quickly composed. "John, I told you, it's my personal space. I just need time for myself, that's all," she said, avoiding direct eye contact. "I understand that everyone needs personal space," John spoke slowly, "but when it starts to feel like you're hiding something, I have a right to ask." And here, his voice carried a different tone. It wasn't just suspicion, it was genuine pain. Pain that Amanda, his wife, didn't trust him, wasn't open with him. "You leave for someplace else every time after yoga, and your phone is always on silent. That's not what I'm used to from you. You promised not to lie to me, and now I feel like you're keeping me at a distance. If I were just paranoid, that'd be one thing, but I feel like something's wrong." Amanda took a deep breath, her eyes growing more serious. She silently walked to the window, looking out at the garden as though seeking answers there. John realized he had to tread carefully now. "John, you don't understand," she finally began, her voice less confident. "All of this is part of something I want to achieve. I know you want to be part of my life, but sometimes I need to be alone to find myself. Yoga helps me find peace and balance. It's more than just physical practice for me. It's a spiritual journey, and I know it's hard for you, but I'm asking you to accept it." "But what's the secret about Elle?" John asked, his voice growing more insistent. He couldn't stay silent any longer about the name he had seen on her phone. Amanda spun around sharply, her eyes locking onto his. "Have you been snooping on my phone?" Her eyes were filled with anger, but there was something deeper beneath the surface: sadness, pain, and shame. John didn't answer immediately, but his glance was telling enough. He couldn't deny that he wanted to know who the man was behind those cryptic messages. "Elle is just my yoga instructor," Amanda said, attempting to explain with the weariness of someone tired of endless questions. "He helps me with some challenging poses. That's all." But John wasn't convinced. Her words didn't fully explain everything he had seen and felt. His heart was racing, and he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than just yoga. "Why are you so protective of your phone? Why won't you even let me see your sessions?" he continued, raising his voice slightly. Amanda looked startled, her face going pale. She took a step back as if retreating from his accusations, but John felt she was on the verge of saying something truthful. He could sense it. "John, I don't want you to think I'm deceiving you." "It's not what you think," she said softly, her tone almost pleading but still evading the answers he needed. She paused before adding, looking him in the eyes, "I want to tell you everything, but I'm afraid you won't understand. You always overthink and start doubting everything when you get anxious." John lowered his head, and a moment of silence filled the room. He couldn't hold it in anymore. "I want to know, Amanda. Is there something else I don't know? I need to hear the truth. Only the truth." Amanda didn't respond immediately. She sat on the couch, staring into her hands. She seemed to be struggling with the moment, but she knew she would have to say it all. John was ready to listen, even if it meant everything would change. "Maybe you don't want to know," she said quietly, "but I can't keep living a lie. There are things I'm not ready to talk about yet. I'm just confused." In the meantime, John felt his heart fill with fear. The very fear he couldn't name before now fully consumed him. He knew this wasn't the end, but he was struggling to cope with the idea that they might lose everything. He stood silently, trying to process what was happening between them and what she was really hiding. John stood in the shadows, watching Amanda leave the yoga studio. His heart raced, and countless questions flooded his mind. Everything that had happened lately made him feel suspicious. He couldn't just ignore all the changes. The decision was made. He would follow her. In the early morning light, as the city still slept, John observed Amanda walking toward her car, unaware her husband was only a few steps away. He decided to keep his distance, careful not to be noticed. She got into her car and drove off. John followed her, making sure to stay discreet. When Amanda's car stopped in front of the yoga studio, John parked a few streets away, watching her from a distance. Everything seemed normal. Amanda entered the studio, her face lighting up as she greeted people. But minutes later, something changed. She exited through the back door as if trying not to draw attention. John couldn't believe his eyes. She wasn't heading back to her car. Instead, she approached a black sedan where an unfamiliar man was waiting. John felt his heart sink. This was no longer just suspicion, it was reality. Amanda got into the car with the man, and they drove off. John couldn't let it go. He decided to follow them. The drive took them to an unfamiliar area. Keeping a safe distance, John watched as they navigated through various streets and turns. When they finally left the city center, John realized they were heading somewhere more secluded. A large, private house emerged ahead, a modern mansion with tall windows and a well-lit property. John parked at a distance, careful not to be seen. He was bracing himself for a shocking discovery, but still couldn't believe Amanda, his wife, would do something like this. Amanda stepped out of the car, and the stranger escorted her to the entrance. He was tall, dark-haired, and seemed very confident. John felt his heart breaking, but he couldn't turn away. He couldn't just leave without knowing the truth. A few minutes later, John decided to get closer to see more. The distance allowed him to observe while remaining unnoticed. He watched as Amanda and the man entered the house. The door closed behind them, and John felt the unbearable weight of pain. This was the moment he realized Amanda wasn't just spending time at yoga sessions. She was in that house, which meant their married life wasn't what he thought it was. John stayed there, waiting for hours. His thoughts swirled relentlessly, offering no peace. He imagined the worst but couldn't let himself jump to conclusions. He had to know more. Eventually, Amanda reappeared at the door of the house. She was with the same man, but this time she looked different. Her face was calm, and her clothes suggested she hadn't just been at the yoga studio but had been relaxing as well. The man escorted Amanda to the car, and they drove back into the city. John felt like he was on edge. He continued following them until he saw them part ways. Amanda returned to her yoga studio, while the man disappeared into the night. John didn't know what to do. He felt betrayed and confused, but he knew they needed to talk about it. He could no longer keep his emotions bottled up. As he drove home, his mind was racing. his heart heavy with the weight of uncertainty about what awaited him after confronting the truth. When John arrived home, he was overwhelmed with sadness, unsure of what lay ahead. John sat on the couch, staring blankly into space. His thoughts swirled, and his heart pounded in his chest. This was the moment he finally decided to stop following his suspicions and intuition. Now, he had to uncover the full truth. He glanced at Amanda, who was quietly sitting in the kitchen, sipping tea. There was something in her eyes he couldn't quite identify, neither guilt nor remorse. Was it indifference? Or did she truly see nothing wrong with her actions? John knew he had to act to understand who Amanda really was. Unable to endure the silence any longer, John turned his attention to her yoga bag sitting on the table near the entrance. At first, he hadn't given it much thought, but now the bag seemed like a part of the puzzle he needed to solve. John grabbed it and placed it on the table. Opening it was easy, and he decided not to wait. At first, he pulled out a yoga mat. Of course, he wasn't surprised. It was just another ordinary item Amanda would have for her yoga sessions. But then, the contents of the bag started revealing things he couldn't explain. Among the items, he found an expensive set of lingerie that was clearly not meant for yoga. In her favorite colors, black, red, and white, the lingerie looked far too elegant and delicate to be part of her sports wardrobe. John's gaze returned to the bag, his curiosity piqued even more by what came next. He pulled out a bottle of champagne, unopened. Champagne in a yoga bag? This further clouded his thoughts. But the most shocking discovery was a small metal key. There was no label on it, just a tag with a series of numbers. John couldn't believe his eyes. A key? To what? Without hesitation, he grabbed the key and set out to find where it might fit. His one desire was to uncover the truth, no matter how bitter it might be. The city was bustling, but John moved quickly and with purpose. Within minutes, he found the address associated with the key. It was an upscale apartment building in the heart of the city. John approached the entrance, examining the building closely, and stepped into the lobby. When he reached the designated apartment, his heart skipped a beat. He stood for a few seconds, hesitating at the door, wondering if he was crossing a line. But his need for answers overpowered his fear. He inserted the key into the lock and turned it. The door opened. John entered cautiously, careful not to make a sound. The apartment looked expensive and modern, as if it had been designed for someone important. There was no indication it was just a rental. Everything was too refined and styled, the furniture high-end and functional. Room by room, John explored, his heart racing with every step. In the living room, something caught his eye that he couldn't ignore. On the wall hung a large photo of Amanda. But it wasn't just Amanda in the photo. It was the company she was keeping. They were men. And not just men. Some of them looked strangely familiar. John couldn't understand why his wife would keep such photos. More than that, each man in the pictures appeared very close to Amanda, like old friends, or even more than that. John stepped closer, examining the photos. She was with them in various settings, cafes, streets, parties. This was entirely different from what he had imagined. Now it all made sense. Amanda wasn't just doing yoga. She had been spending time with other men, and this apartment was her hideaway for something far beyond yoga. John felt his heart clench in his chest. He had found what he had been dreading. He couldn't just stand by and watch his life fall apart. His hands trembled, and his mind was filled with one question. How had he missed this? How had he failed to see that his wife had stopped being the person he loved? Taking a deep breath, John gave the apartment one last look before leaving, locking the door behind him. He drove home, where Amanda was already waiting. When John returned home, his heart was heavy. He carried the key and the photos he had found in the apartment, his entire being consumed by anger and confusion. He could no longer stay silent. Amanda was at home, sitting on the couch, unaware that her life was about to be turned upside down. John walked into the room and threw the key and photos onto the table in front of her, his gaze fixed on her, searching for an explanation. Amanda looked up and saw his face, strained with tension, revealing the depth of his pain. What does this all mean, Amanda? His voice was calm, but it couldn't mask the storm inside. I found this in your bag. And this key, where did you get it? And these photos, Who are you with? What's going on? Amanda didn't rush to respond. She sighed, and while her eyes still held a sense of guilt, she didn't try to deny the facts. She didn't try to lie. She knew that John had already uncovered everything he needed to know. It's not what you think, John, she said softly, placing her hands on the table. I'm not cheating on you, and it's not what you imagine. You know I've been practicing yoga for a long time, and it's my true calling. But everything you found is part of a bigger picture. I lead a double life, but not because of betrayal. I do it for something important that you don't understand. John stood, looking at Amanda as if she had lost her mind. He couldn't comprehend how any of this made sense. His heart raced, and his thoughts struggled to process all the questions. A double life? He repeated, not believing his ears. You mean those men in the photos? You expect me to believe this is just some spiritual experience? Amanda raised her hand in a calming gesture, but her expression grew even more serious. John, I know it sounds strange, she began, but I'm truly involved in something meaningful. It's more than just yoga. I've created my own spiritual community. It's become my business, and I help people find themselves through deep yoga and meditation practices. Those men, they're my clients. They pay for me to guide them through these practices, to help them experience a spiritual awakening. John stared at her, trying to grasp what she was saying. His mind resisted the notion. So, you're telling me these men paid for yoga, and you just spent time with them as a spiritual guide? He asked, disbelief evident in his voice. And the apartment? Is that also part of this spiritual experience? Amanda nodded, her gaze fixed on John. Her voice was calm, but her eyes held a stubborn conviction, as if she truly believed what she was saying. Yes, the apartment is for my sessions, John. It's a place where I hold intensives, where we meditate, where people can release their stress and find a deeper connection with themselves. It's not what you think. I'm not cheating on you. All of this has a profound purpose. John couldn't listen anymore. It all seemed absurd to him. He felt as if Amanda had crafted a convenient story to justify her secrets, her relationships with other men. Are you serious? His voice grew firmer. Do you expect me to believe this is all a spiritual experience? Amanda, you're trying to manipulate me. First, you hid all of this, and now you want me to believe it's just business? You keep going to those men, spending time with them, and now you're telling me they're just your clients. Amanda remained silent for a few seconds. She knew this was difficult for John, but she was resolute in her beliefs. Her calm demeanor served as her shield. She couldn't undo what she had done, but she was convinced it was the right path for her soul, for her purpose. I know it's hard to understand, John, she said, but I do this for myself and for others. It's more than just business. I help people find a deeper meaning in life. Those men, they're not seeking pleasure. They're seeking spiritual awakening, and I guide them through it. It's important to me, and I want you to understand that. John fell silent. He couldn't imagine how any of this could be true. He couldn't understand why his wife, the woman he loved, had decided to immerse herself so deeply in this world. Her words felt vague, but John sensed that something wasn't right. He lowered his head, trying to calm his emotions. It was all too overwhelming for him. His heart felt like it was being torn apart. He couldn't go back to the way things were, but he also couldn't let Amanda go. She was a part of his world. I don't know what to do, he said quietly, looking at her. How can I believe in this when it all seems so strange? Amanda remained silent, but her gaze was filled with compassion. She knew John felt betrayed, and it broke her heart. I understand that this is hard, John, but it's part of my journey, and if you want, we can find a way to work through this together. I'm willing to explain everything in more detail if you want. John looked up, but his heart was filled with doubt. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know if he could forgive such a deep uncertainty. Amanda sat on the couch, looking at John with sorrow in her eyes. She tried to explain why she had acted the way she had, but each word felt harder for him to accept. John sat across from her, staring at the floor, trying to organize his thoughts, but his mind was tangled in pain and confusion. John, Amanda began again, her voice soft but steady. I know this is hard to process, but you know how I work. I can't just walk away and change everything immediately. This isn't just my job, it's a part of who I am. I help people. Even your cousin came to me for guidance. John's head shot up, startled. His heart skipped a beat, and a cold sense of unease washed over him again. He didn't know what to expect from Amanda anymore, but this revelation felt too close to betrayal. What do you mean? His voice was calmer than he expected, though he wasn't ready for what he was about to hear. Amanda took a deep breath, as if preparing herself for words that would break John completely. He doesn't feel understood by his wife, Amanda continued. She doesn't support his interests, and he's been seeking understanding and connection. You know how it is when people can't find common ground at home. He turned to me. He wanted to find inner balance, restore his peace of mind, and I helped him through yoga. John couldn't believe his ears. His cousin? And she was speaking about it as if it was completely natural. He felt a wave of anger and pain crash over him. How could this happen? How could Amanda have helped his relative, and why did she treat it as something so ordinary? Are you serious? John asked, though it was hard to hide the despair in his voice. You helped him find balance? This sounds like you've dragged him into the same thing you're chasing for yourself. Amanda sighed and looked him in the eyes again. She could see the pain and fury building within him, and she knew this was unavoidable. She wasn't going to lie, but she also couldn't deny what she believed was vital to her life. I helped him realize that he needed to restore his inner harmony, John, and I was the one who supported him in doing that. It wasn't about any romantic or physical relationship. It was just yoga, meditation, and spiritual practices. He came to me because he couldn't find common ground with his wife. John couldn't listen anymore. His heart was racing, and it felt like something inside his chest was breaking apart. He felt this moment was draining every bit of energy from him, every word Amanda spoke driving another nail into his psyche. How could she speak about it so calmly? How could she justify supporting this man in such a way? Words failed him as he struggled to express the bitterness he felt. Amanda, his voice was barely holding steady. This is too much. You helped him, and now even my family is involved in this? Is this something I'm supposed to accept? He felt the anger rising, but he tried to keep it in check. He didn't want to yell. He didn't want this to turn into another fight. He didn't want them to fall into the same cycle of unresolved arguments. But his soul was shattered. It felt like everything he knew about his wife was crumbling in an instant. I don't know what to do, he said, barely containing his emotions. I need some time to figure out how to deal with this. Amanda looked at him, her gaze unwavering from his face. She understood what he was going through and how hard these revelations were for him. She tried to explain, but she knew she couldn't undo what had already been done. I understand, she said quietly, and I don't want you to feel this way. But I need your support, John. It's really important for me that you understand this isn't what you think. This is part of who I am now. John sat in silence, unsure of how to respond. His heart was broken, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between them. Everything felt unclear now, and even though he loved Amanda, that love was stained with lies, doubts, and the sense that he no longer knew who she was. I'll think about it, he said after a few seconds of silence, standing up and heading for the door. I need some time. I'm going for a walk. Maybe I can make sense of all this. Amanda didn't reply. She simply watched as John walked out of the house, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She knew this was important for both of them, but she also realized she might be losing him. John walked through the streets, oblivious to his surroundings. His mind was flooded with questions that refused to leave him alone. How had this happened? What had broken his life? Amanda had changed, and this wasn't just about yoga or her spiritual community. It was something deeper, something John couldn't quite grasp. He thought about everything they had shared together. They weren't just husband and wife. They were partners, friends, two people who supported each other. And now everything felt so foreign, as if they had taken two completely different paths, leaving him in the shadows of her world. Could it be about money? He wondered, questioning himself. But we weren't struggling. I always gave her gifts, planned surprises, provided her with everything she wanted. Why wasn't that enough? It became harder for him to think, and he felt the emptiness inside him growing deeper. He couldn't understand what had really happened to Amanda. Worst of all, He couldn't make her understand why this hurt him so much. But he decided he couldn't just sit and cry without taking action. His resolve began to form, and he made a decision, strange as it might seem. The next day, John decided to go to a yoga class himself. He headed to the studio without telling Amanda anything about his plans. His goal was simple, to see for himself what she was doing there, why yoga had become such an important part of her life. Perhaps it truly was her way of self-expression, but he had to find out. Maybe he had failed to understand how much this practice meant to her. When John entered the studio, he felt an unusual atmosphere. The air was filled with the scent of lavender, and the soft, diffused lighting created a calming vibe. It was all so different from what he was used to seeing at home. Yet despite this, he felt out of place. He wasn't the kind of person who attended yoga classes. But now, it seemed like the only way to discover the truth. If he couldn't trust Amanda anymore, the only way to uncover the truth was to immerse himself in her world. John found a corner, trying to remain unnoticed. And then he realized, Amanda wasn't there. He looked around the entire studio, trying to spot her among the participants, but she was nowhere to be seen. This was strange. She never missed a session, always being present, even when she struggled to get out of bed after late-night practices. Her absence was so glaring that John couldn't ignore it. He felt disappointed, but he didn't give up. He decided to stay and participate. Even though he wasn't a practitioner, the yoga class gave him a new experience. His body relaxed, the tension left his muscles, and although he still felt a sense of unease, he enjoyed the momentary relief. Yoga made him forget his painful thoughts for at least a few minutes. But what next? John returned home late in the evening. Questions swirled in his head, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unresolved. When he opened the door, he found the house empty. Amanda was gone again. He sat on the couch, lost in thought, and instinctively pulled up old photos on his phone. Photos of them together, happy, smiling, celebrating every important milestone. Each photo was a memory of joyful moments, but now they felt so distant. John stared at their faces, feeling the pain. How had it come to this? Why had she changed so much? Tears welled up in his eyes, and he couldn't hold them back. Crying felt strange. He wasn't an emotional man, but it was the only way to express the pain consuming his heart. He cried, thinking about what he had lost, how his life had changed in an instant, and what lay ahead. He felt his love for Amanda turning into pain. And though he hadn't yet decided what to do next, one thing was clear. He couldn't leave things as they were. He needed to understand if there was a chance to restore their relationship, or if he needed to move on and leave it all behind. John sat in his car, staring at the black rear entrance of the house Amanda always went to. His heart raced, knowing that this time he had to uncover the whole truth. He could no longer leave things to chance. After what he saw last time, when Amanda left the yoga studio and drove off with an unfamiliar man, John couldn't stay home calmly. He felt as if his entire life had been a facade. This time, he came prepared. He brought a hidden camera to capture everything happening inside. It seemed like this would be the most crucial moment of his life, the moment he finally got all the answers. He parked his car at a safe distance from the house to avoid drawing attention and quietly stepped out, holding the camera in his hand. Amanda hadn't been at the yoga studio when he went there for the class yesterday, so he assumed she would return to this same house again. It was her routine, arriving at the studio and then spending significant time elsewhere. John approached the house cautiously, his heart pounding harder with each step. He felt a mix of fear and determination, knowing he was close to discovering the truth but dreading what he might find. John watched the house from behind the bushes, his heart pounding in his chest and adrenaline coursing through his veins. Amanda appeared a few minutes later, dressed in a new, elegant athletic outfit she'd recently started wearing. She looked different from before. She had always been stylish, but now her appearance carried a newfound confidence, making her even more striking. Amanda entered through the back door and disappeared inside the house. John waited a few minutes before moving closer, not wanting to arouse suspicion. As he approached, he noticed the door was slightly ajar, and he quietly slipped inside without making a sound. John's body tensed as he stepped into the house, knowing that every move could be pivotal. He held the camera in front of him, recording every moment. Walking down the hallway, he heard Amanda's soft voice coming from another room. He approached the door, listening intently until her words became clearer. Amanda was speaking in a calm, soothing tone typical of her spiritual sessions. But what John saw through the crack in the door was not what he had expected. This wasn't an ordinary yoga session. It was something more. Amanda was sitting in a lotus pose, and in front of her was a man unlike those she usually brought to the studio. Their bodies were far too close, and this didn't look like simple training or instruction. Her hands rested on his shoulders, and their interaction was physical and intimate. John couldn't believe his eyes. His breath caught as he witnessed what was happening before him. He felt every muscle in his body tighten with frustration and anger. What he saw was shocking, and Amanda's appearance was stunningly captivating. He kept recording everything on the camera. The closeness between Amanda and the man was beyond what could be considered a spiritual practice. Their movements were synchronized, but what was happening between them didn't resemble meditation or yoga. It was something deeper. This was outright betrayal. John could no longer hide his disappointment and confusion, though he managed to keep his emotions in check. He waited a few more minutes, observing the situation, then decided his presence was no longer useful. He wanted to gather more evidence, but seeing what was unfolding made him realize it was more than he could bear. Moreover, he couldn't just interfere in what was happening. At this moment, he needed to go home, review what he had recorded, and decide what to do next. John retreated back into the hallway, pausing for a moment to glance into the room. His anger and resentment boiled, but he tried to stay composed. Slipping out the back door, he got into his car and drove home. His thoughts were a chaotic swirl. He didn't know whether to confront Amanda with the evidence he'd gathered, or if it was even worth pursuing. One thing was clear. He couldn't leave this unresolved. Back home, John sat on the couch and reviewed the footage he had recorded. His mind was racing. He knew he had to make a decision, but every step felt like it would change everything. What he had witnessed had left him in shock, and he understood that each next move could alter his life irreversibly. The following days were filled with tension. John sat at his office desk, staring at his computer screen, though his thoughts were elsewhere. He had been carefully reviewing the footage from his hidden camera, analyzing every moment of Amanda's secret meetings in her spiritual space. The evidence he had collected clearly showed that Amanda was no longer the woman he had once loved. He couldn't stay with her any longer. But then another revelation hit him. One of the men Amanda frequently met with was his colleague. The discovery was a shock. He recognized the man from the workplace security cameras. The man, who appeared to be an ordinary businessman, was far too familiar with Amanda, too close. John felt anger rise in his chest. How had he not noticed this before? There was no time for doubts. Action was necessary. At a corporate event hosted by their company, John accidentally ran into the man. He stood by the drinks table, chatting with colleagues, when their eyes met. John smiled briefly, but inside, his heart burned with something far more than curiosity. The man noticed John's gaze and approached him, extending a hand in greeting. "Hey, John," he said. "How are you? Haven't seen you in a while." John responded coldly, barely nodding. "I'm fine, thanks. How about you?" he said, trying to hide his feelings. "I'm good too. Just here to catch up with everyone," the man replied, raising an eyebrow. "But I must say, I saw your wife recently. She's quite fascinating. Very harmonious when it comes to certain things." John felt his heart clench. He tried to appear unaffected. "It's good that she's found her harmony," John replied, attempting to keep the conversation light. But the man didn't let up. "You know, John, I'm impressed by how much she respects yoga and all those spiritual practices," he said, glancing at John with a hint of irony. "She's a true master, as I've seen, even helping others find their way." John felt the blood rush to his face. It became clear that this man knew far more than he was letting on. And perhaps it wasn't just about yoga. "I'm glad she's found her place in life," John replied tersely, trying to conceal his anger. The man seemed to enjoy the situation. "Well, I won't say more about it, John, but you really shouldn't worry. You've never quite grasped how important all this is to her. You need to let people grow, you know?" With that, He walked away. John stood there, his eyes fixed on a distant point as the man left. It seemed his suspicions were further confirmed, but he still lacked concrete evidence. Now he knew something was definitely wrong, but he couldn't just let it go. The next few days, John spent deep in thought. He repeatedly reviewed the videos he had recorded, analyzing every moment, every glance, every touch between Amanda and her clients, which appeared far closer than he could have ever imagined. Sometimes he tried to convince himself that it was all in his head, but the reality was relentless. One evening, John decided to confront Amanda again. They were sitting in their bedroom, and John, looking directly into her eyes, asked, "I saw you with that man, Amanda. And this is more than yoga. What does it mean? You never told me this was part of your spiritual journey." Amanda didn't answer immediately. She looked at him calmly, as if this were just another conversation. "John, you don't understand. This is simply my path to self-realization, and I'm helping others find their inner balance. This isn't about you. It's not about us. It's just my life," she said, her voice steady and calm. "I saw your sessions. I saw what happens there. How can you say this isn't betrayal?" John couldn't hold back his anger. Amanda sighed quietly and looked at him. "It's not betrayal, John. This is my purpose in life. I help people grow and find themselves through yoga. I can't be confined by your prejudices. This is my choice. And I believe you'll understand that." John sat in silence, and after a moment, he realized he couldn't continue this anymore. All her words, her attempts to convince him, felt hollow. He walked to his computer and, without saying another word, sent the videos of her sessions to her friends and family. He couldn't bear it any longer. When everything was ready, he turned back to her and said, "This is your life, Amanda. I can't be a part of it anymore. I'm sorry, but I'm leaving." With those words, he left the house, leaving Amanda alone with her choices. He understood that life would never be the same, but he knew he had made the right decision for himself. What would you have done in John's place? Should he have revealed everything immediately or taken another approach? Share your thoughts in the comments.